Brother David, you ready? You're getting ready. It's thinking. Computers know how to think. Amen. You ready? Good. Come on. I've got a lesson for you.
Is that, yeah, there we go. All right, we're on. So hopefully that caught up back there, turned on. Um, so our lesson title is Trusting in Times of Tragedy. And our lesson talks about, tragedies are unavoidable. They're just a part of this life, aren't they? You think about a lot of things. I was thinking, my wife got a message this morning from a lady she works with, and apparently in North Carolina there was a car accident, and there's a little 3.5-year-old lost his life. Just tragic. Then you think about the earthquakes that took place down in Venezuela. I think the last number I heard, they had confirmed at least a little over 1,400 deaths, and there's still 31,000 plus unaccounted for. And just to see some of the pictures and stuff, the devastation, just that quick, just people. I don't know what time of the day or night that it happened, but it was so sudden. I mean, some of the buildings they just collapsed. So just a tragic events that take place. So we all have tragedies in our life, don't we? I mean, we do. And my tragedy, it may not be as big as maybe what yours is in your eyes, but what's that saying? Your perspective is your reality, and there's a lot of truth to that. When it's you and when you're in it, that makes all the difference. But we looked at Job, and I'll kind of hit back. We didn't get very far, but we read Job chapter 1. We read the story. We had an introduction to Job of what God said about him. We had an introduction, I think it was a very good introduction of the mindset of Job there in the last few verses of Job chapter 1. He says there he says, and said, Job, it says, and said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And it says, in all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. So he was not asking God for or expecting more from God. He was just trusting God. And I went back, I did take the time to go back and just confirm what I thought was true. But the name Job means, and this is odd to me, it was so odd that his name means this. His name means hated in the Hebrew. That's what the Strong's Concordance shows. His name means he was hated, or his name means hated. It also means persecuted. And I thought, well, why would God give somebody a name like that? But it tells us, and it made me ask the question, well, who hated Job? Who hated him? God spoke highly of him. I think his family, I think there was a closest. I think we can just sense that by the closeness and how he prayed and made offerings for his family. I don't think they hated him. It didn't sound like his community hated him. So who hated Job? Satan. And he's the same one that hates all of us. He hates us. He hates God's people. He hates God. And he wants to do as much as possible to cause problems. But he can't do that except the Lord allow him to do that. His name also means persecuted. Well, he was. He was persecuted by the very old devil, wasn't he? And if you read through the book of Job, you'll see that in a way he was kind of persecuted by his three friends. And our lesson talks about how they started off good, but they ended up kind of theorizing what happened. Why are you in this mess, Job? And you would think they hated him too. Because they was trying to say, well, you're at fault. What have you done? What did you do to bring this tragedy in your life? And we read Job chapter 1 there. Boy, it's obvious that Job had a bad day, didn't he? He had a horrible day, just an unimaginable day. And I believe the Lord, He allowed it to go to an extreme. I don't have a day to compare. I don't have a day that can compare to the day that Job had. So they'll think saying, well, somebody else has probably got it worse, and that's true. We all have those good days. Y'all ever had a day that was just going? Boy, this day's just going really good. Y'all ever have those? Man, things are just this is a good day. I like these kind of days. And then that phone will ring, and we was doing. I think it was Saturday. It wasn't a tragedy, but just something that kind of took the shine off of the day. Just having a good time with the granddaughters and the daughter. And then you get a phone call, and something's taking place. Somebody's sick, and just unexpected. We just don't expect the things to happen. So I thought it was interesting to go back and look at his name and who hated him. We looked at his family briefly. He's a very blessed man as far as family. It says in verse 2 there of Job 1, it says, and there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. So that's a pretty good sized little family, isn't it? I'll think of my wife there. So with her, there's 7 of them. Well, she has a sister that passed away, but there's 7 kids. With her mother, I believe there was 14 kids. That's a bunch of kids, isn't it? And as far as I know, tragedy struck that family when those kids were several of them were little. Her grandfather died suddenly. He worked on the railroad, and there was a train had got on the wrong track, and they were going to collide. And they said he ran, I don't know how far, he ran a long ways to get that train to reroute it. He died of a heart attack. Just in there was that family with all those little kids. This was the times when you didn't have all the things that would help you. But yeah, they made it. But so tragedy struck their family. But we see that Job was blessed with a large family. I think I mentioned how we look at Job's family, and it kind of makes Job real to us. We touched on Job's fortune, that his substance that he had. We touched on, our lesson talks about that Job, he had status and substance, but what made him significant? What made Job stand out? All these things. He had a lot of stuff, didn't he? And I thought about that yesterday. Any of y'all ever been to an estate sale? I had never been. And my daughter Leah, we went to an estate sale with them yesterday. And yeah, it was, I told, there was a lady there, and I just mentioned her. I said, it's like they were abducted. I mean, their house everything was still in the home, the clothing, it's just like they vanished. But all that stuff that they had collected over the years, It stayed, didn't it? It was meaningless. So really what was significant about them? I didn't know anything about the owners. I did hear, I think my daughter's the lady told her that the man, he was an attorney. So no doubt he had an impact on lives through his life. Hope it was a good impact. You know, attorneys, they get kind of either a up or a down, but hopefully he had a good impact. But you could sense some things about them. They liked to read. I took it that the lady of the house was a grand. I know this. Well, there was a playhouse outside, had all kinds of toys. There was all kinds of stuff in the house for kids. So they left kind of a legacy. But really, what made them significant? Well, probably to the grandkids, it wasn't the stuff, but it was them. It was who they were. That was what was important. That's what they'll remember about them. So I think that's what we'll remember about Job is not his substance, but what made him stand out. His family, his fortunes. God had blessed him, if we look at it that way. And then we was going to talk about Job's faith. And let's talks about how it's clear that Job's faith was the most central component of his life. Now, I was talking about his name, and another name that was not in the concordance, but I think he was hated, he was persecuted, but I think we could say that Job was trusted. You know, and I think God he trusts people with tragedy. You know, he knows who he can trust. He knows, and he knew Job. He knew how Job would react to the situation. Job had no idea any of this was coming. Job got blindsided, didn't he? I mean, just out of nowhere, these tragedies in a day's time took place. So I believe we could say that Job, if we wanted to give him another name, I believe it would be trusted. And that speaks well of him. But there in verse 1, we looked at how that God wants us to know who Job was. And again, I'll just read the verse. It says, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright and one that feared God and eschewed evil. So that's the description that God wanted us to have. We don't know the author, or I couldn't find the author. One writer thought it may have been Moses, maybe have been the writer of the book of Job. So we don't know the answer to that. We know Job was just part of the story. Somebody else was writing about his life, what took place, what happened to him. His significance we're talking about, it came from his faith in God. In fact, one important lesson we learn about trusting God in tragedy from the life of Job is this. And he says, make your devotion to God the priority of your life. I thought, well, that's good. Because Job wasn't asking for a way out. And I put a note that devotion should not be based on circumstances. You know, we're all good and happy and praising the Lord. And I'm not saying this in a derogatory way, but when things are going well, you know, we're happy and good. But when things don't go well, then that kind of says who we are. You know, where is our devotion? Is it based on circumstances? And I believe we're taught here that Job, his devotion was not based on circumstances. It seems as if he was going to trust the Lord no matter what, wasn't he? I mean, no matter what happened in his life, he had decided. He had made that decision. And really, I think it was just a part of who Job was, that he was going to be that kind of person. So that's kind of the highlights that we got started with. I think we may have, I don't know how far we got, but we was going to look at what Job's fear of God looks like. You know, what's the picture that we can see of that? What did his life say? Pictures of how he feared the Lord, how he reverenced the Lord. In verses 4 and 5 there, Job chapter 1, it says, "And his sons went and feasted in their houses, everyone his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and to drink with them. And it was so, when the days of their feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning, and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." And it's at a highlight here. It says, "This did Job continually." So this is who Job was. This was a continual part of his life. And I would tell people to pray, for your children. Pray for them continually. Pray for them daily. Pray for them hourly. Pray that God's presence would be with them. I think there are two places of responsibility. Is our responsibility as parents and grandparents for our children. I believe God, He's willing to accept responsibility for our children. And that's what Job did. He did what he could, but he made it a daily practice to sanctify and to involve his children in his worship toward the Lord. So we're given the account of his family. We read there about a feast, and that Job made an altar. He worshiped the Lord. He interceded to the Lord on behalf of his children. And he did this just in case the children had grieved the Lord. So incidentally, our lesson says that this doesn't necessarily mean that Job's children were wicked. And it doesn't. But he was willing to pray for them. He was willing to bring them before the Lord each and every day. It does suggest that Job was sensitive, both personally and as the head of his family, to the importance of being right with God. And so that is very important. The Bible also tells us that Job eschewed evil. What does that mean, that he eschewed evil? Well, he avoided it. And that's how we should be. So that's another good example that Job gives us. We should eschew evil in our lives. What's the old saying? You play with fire, you'll get burnt. And that's sometimes we think, well, I'll just play with fire, but we should eschew evil. We should avoid evil. And I believe that's the type of character that we see in Job in his spiritual life. So his reverence for God and avoidance of evil are linked, our lesson tells us. Job 28:28 says, "And unto man he said, Behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding." And that's true, very true. There's a quote here. It says, "The remarkable thing about fearing God is that when you fear God," now I like this. It says that when you fear God, you fear nothing. It says, whereas if you do not fear God, you fear everything else. Does that make sense? Fear God, and you know He's your protector. He's with you. What else can you fear? What shall I fear? What shall I fear? Why would I fear what man can do unto me? But, if I don't have God in the right place, then I'm fearful. I'm fearful of what man can do to me. I'm fearful of what the old devil can do to me. But, if we have God, the right reverence toward Him, I believe that alleviates that fear. And, sometimes it takes tragedy to get us to realize where our devotion is, where our reverence is. I pray that none of us have tragedies in our lives, but we will. And we'll have things that will take place in our lives, and there'll be a great tragedy. So Job's relationship with God was central in his life. He was trusting God very well through difficult days, and that begins with trusting God well in the day-to-day. You know, it's not just when these things happen that we trust. It's a history of trust. It's a daily trust of the Lord, knowing that He wants what's best for us, and knowing, and again, I always say it's easier to say this stuff, but knowing that if something happens in our life, He, as a believer, He has allowed that to happen in our lives, and that is a challenge. That's a challenge for me. I'll say it that way, you know, because I'm a whyer, and any of y'all whires, I am. You know, wow. And I have to stop and say, you know, but something will happen in your life, and immediately I think it's just human nature, and it's a fair question, but we'll say, why? You know, why is this happening? And that was one of the questions that we'll see how Job's friends, that was the question that they finally got to. Then they started surmising, you know, why did this happen to you? What have you done, Job? So we ask that question, but we have to be careful with it. So we see the devotion of Job. We got to the point where we're going to talk about the devastation of life that took place. I put a note here for myself, and it's simply this, and I'm going to share something else that I came across. Neither Job or his friends knew the reason. They didn't know the why. None of them knew the why. None of them knew the reason or the why for his suffering. But I put that he just trusted. He did not know why these things were happening, but would it have made any difference had he known all the details? Would it have made any difference had he known that Satan had requested access to him? It wouldn't have changed his situation, would it? You know, sometimes we want to know the why, but really, it wouldn't change what we're in. It wouldn't change what's going on. I came across, I thought it was just a really good summary. John MacArthur, his commentary, part of it was this. He made this brief comments here. He said Job and his friends wanted to analyze the suffering and look for causes and solutions. Does that sound familiar? How can we fix this? You know, why did this happen, and how can we fix this? So they wanted to analyze the suffering and look for causes and solutions, using all their sound theology and insight into the situation. They searched for answers, but found only useless and wrong ideas, for which God rebuked them. If you want to go read it, He rebuked them in Job 42, verse 7. They couldn't know why Job suffered because what happened in heaven, here's the key, because what happened in heaven between God and Satan was unknown to them. That really big piece of information was missing, wasn't it? And more often than not, that's the same with us. You know, I think I did mention, you know, the little 3.5-year-old child that was yesterday died in that car accident. Why? Who knows why? What's the answer to that? We don't know the answer to that. Sometimes we never know. I think sometimes maybe God does let us know about tragedy. But it was unknown to them. But they thought they knew all the answers, but they only intensified the dilemma by their insistent ignorance. MacArthur was pretty much to the point with this. He says, by spreading out some of the elements of this great theme, we can see the following truths in Job's experience. He says, he makes 6 points. He says, number one, there are matters going on in heaven with God that believers know nothing about, yet they affect their lives. True statement? It is, isn't it? There's so much that we don't know. His ways are above our ways. You know, His knowledge is so much more above ours. The second point, he says, even the best effort at explaining the issues of life can be useless. And they can. Sometimes the exclamation just doesn't help, does it? Sometimes it makes it worse. And then the third thing, God's people, he says that he puts a period, He says God's people do suffer, period. So we know that to be true. Bad things happen all the time to good people. And he says, so one, and I put this in both. He says, so one cannot judge a person's spirituality by his painful circumstances or successes. Have you ever seen that done? That someone's spiritual condition was graded on what was going on in their life. If things were going well, they're tight with the Lord. You know, if they have a tragedy in their life, there must be something wrong in their lives. And we grade people, but that's not true. We should not judge a person's spirituality by their circumstances or their successes either. The fourth thing is, even though God seems far away, perseverance in faith is a most noble virtue, since God is good and one can safely leave his life in his hands. That's true, isn't it? But that's not always easy to do. It is say, Lord, here it is. I turn it over to you. The fifth thing, the believer in the midst of suffering, and I'm glad he said this, but the believer in the midst of suffering should not abandon God. Do you see that happen? People will get I don't know, maybe just one word, there'll be a bitterness. And they will abandon. If you love me, why did you let this happen to me? My stars, if anybody wanted to walk away from the Lord, I believe Job would have been a good candidate, wouldn't he? For what he was dealing with, what he went through. But he didn't. Let me find where I'm at here. We should not abandon God, but drew near to him, but we should draw near to him. So out of the fellowship can come the comfort without the explanation. And then the last thing, the number 6, was suffering. Suffering may be intense, but it will ultimately end for the righteous, and God will bless abundantly. It's not forever, is it? It's not forever. I heard a guy yesterday, just a little snippet, little video, and he was deaf, and he'd been born deaf, and his speech was obviously not. It was just different. If you've ever spoke with somebody that was deaf from birth, but he could speak. And he was talking about, he talked to people, and they was, we're so sorry that you're deaf. We wish you could be healed of that. He said, no, I don't want that. He said, no, I don't want that. I don't want to be healed here. He said, I want to be healed in heaven. He said, because the first voice that he would hear would be the Lord calling his name. And I thought, wow, what a perspective. We look at his life as tragic. And it was, but his perspective was different. That encouraged me. And you see people this way, and I believe God trusts us when He allows tragedy to take place in our lives. It's a showing of His trust toward us. That we'll be able to handle these situations. We'll be able to reverence Him. That we'll be able to stick with Him and just trust Him. I don't know. That just kind of moved me when that guy said that. I thought, wow, what a perspective to have. That his goal was his name was Richard. He said he was so excited. His excitement showed. He was so excited to know that the first voice that he would hear, he believed it would be the Lord saying Richard. I thought, wow, what a perspective. But yet those around him said, boy, what a tragedy, what a tragic life you've had to live. So it's his perspective, isn't it? It's where we place our trust. It's that long view that we have. So I know we didn't get far again. I'll try to do better next week. But I think it's a good series on us. Because we all have tragedy in our lives. And how do we react to those tragedies? God kind of threw Job to the wolves, we would say there in verse 8, when he said, "Hast thou considered my servant Job?" But God already knew, didn't he? He knew. I think he set Satan up, didn't he? He did. Because he knew what Job would do. He knew that it was just going to be another victory for Job, and also, in a sense, for the Lord also. To know, let the devil know that he's still in control. All right, I know we didn't get far. We'll try to move quickly next week. Read your book. I think they're good little books. They're very helpful. Thank you all.